So welcome to Awakening Dialogues. Tim Freke is our dialogue partner today. Welcome, Tim. It's great to have you here with me.
It's great to be part of this. This feels like a wonderful experiment.
Yeah, it's fun, a little bit different. Well, I think the last time we spoke was in a cafe in Glastonbury a year or two ago, and I remember that the lunch lasted a fair while. I could have very happily conversed with you for a while longer. So I think we've got a natural flow to enjoy there in the conversation. And the title we've chosen is Awakening, the Paradoxical Nature of Awakening. I know this is something that is central to a lot of what you've been focusing on the last year or two. It's a huge passion of mine as well, that it is this and that. So what is it about paradox that's particularly interesting for you in the spiritual context, Tim?
I'm just trying to think, Will, how far back it goes. It goes back a long way, I guess. And for a long time, it was just implicit in my thought. I started thinking in terms of this, everything had this paradoxical nature. I mean, it goes right back. My first book was the Tao Te Ching. I did a book on the Tao Te Ching. Now, the very center of the Tao Te Ching is the yin yang, which is all about the paradoxical nature of reality. I used to do Tai Chi a lot. I still do a bit, but and that is obviously part of that Taoist tradition. I studied Marx when I was at university very deeply. He picks up on dialectics, which comes from Hegel, and then way back in the Western esoteric tradition, which is all about the play between opposites. There's a deep Renaissance tradition where you get this phrase of the coincidence of opposites, which becomes very central to Western philosophy. So there's always been this thread for me, and then looking around both in philosophy, that side of things, but also just in the spiritual world where I'm, I've spent my life, there's a real dearth of getting it. The other person is Carl Jung. I mean, Carl Jung, I use this phrase, very popular now. I've been using it for a long time, about a both and.
Yes.
And I nicked it originally, from Carl Jung.
Oh, it was Jung that coined that phrase.
Well, I don't know if he probably nicked it from someone
else.
Because he was, but he had this. At one point, there was a line he said, not the niggardly Western either or, but the glorious Eastern both and. And I kind of jumped out. And I thought, "Oh, Carl, that's nice." And so it goes back, for me in all of that. And then, just to round it right up to where I've come to was in the Mystery Experience. My last book was actually really making a conscious effort to go, I want to articulate this way of thinking about everything, and particularly around spirituality, and give it a name. And that's when I started calling it paralogical thinking, to try and go, look, I wanted to make it explicit for me, and I wanted then to give tools which could make a conversation like we're having here and go, look, there's something here which if we acknowledge it, we see everything differently.
And I think something you spoke to there, I mean, you've articulated beautifully that thread through so many different traditions and perspectives of this paralogical nature or the paradoxical nature of reality itself. And you also pointed to that dearth of the understanding that often a problem that we encounter in spiritual circles is people are inclined to land quite firmly or quite fixedly on one side of a view. So it is just the impersonal, or it is just this or that, rather than embracing this paradox. So I sense that behind the paralogical thinking, you're saying clarifying that for yourself, but also there's a service there, right? It's helping out seekers have a bit more of a complex, subtle view.
I just think that the nature of reality is fundamentally paradoxical, or maybe if I'm going to be really push it, I'd say the nature of reality, I don't know what that is. That's a mystery. But the nature of language means that we can only approach it through paradox. That might be more accurate. I'm not sure which to say. But certainly what it seems to be is that if you look at reality through only one side of a paradoxical understanding, you seem to make a tragic error of missing the opposite. And when you can hold the paradox and see it from two opposite perspectives at once, then you have a much deeper, more rounded. It's like having two eyes to see depth. It's like, one eye, you don't see any depth. You get two perspectives on it, and you can begin to hold it. Not just in spirituality, in just about every area of human thought, people feel propelled to choose one or the other.
Yeah.
Disastrously, it seems to me.
Absolutely, because as you implied, they were missing half of the truth. Is it Heisenberg, I think, that said that every profound truth has as its opposite an equally profound truth? So
I think it was Niels Bohr, and Niels Bohr was huge influence on me. Well, actually, ironically, Will, what happened for me was that I articulated this whole paralogical thing, thinking I need to say this, and then kind of it stumbled into and went, oh, hang on, this is like the idea in quantum physics about the wave-particle duality, that you need to see this as both a wave and a particle at the same time. So, and I'm not a physicist, but I kind of went back, looked at it,
and there was a great moment where you realized you had this beautiful philosophical system arising, and then suddenly you realized that you could actually apply the greatest breakthrough in Western science in the last 100 years to it as well.
Incredible. It was the perfect understanding, right at the bottom of Western science, the furthest it's been able to go objectively into the objective world. You've got this, hang on. And what was staggering, though, was like having got that, and, to be honest with you, I can't evaluate that. I don't have enough maths or physics to really evaluate it. I've got a layman's understanding.
Sure.
But then looking at Niels Bohr, the guy who really did that work, and finding that he not only was he saying something similar, he'd invented this name complementarity to describe his philosophy. And then not only had he applied it to physics, but he'd also ended up applying it as a philosophy to the whole of life. So, and he'd taken the yin-yang sign and put it on his coat of arms.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, isn't it? And we can say that one of the greatest difficulties with our imbibing or integrating quantum mechanics and its findings, so far as we understand them, into our worldview, which really hasn't happened, right? It's still sort of, oh yes, and we have quantum physics there, which kind of contradicts everything in Newtonian mechanics, and yet somehow sits alongside it or within it. The difficulty is it not, that it has this central challenge to how we think. We can't get our head, I mean, there's a few of them, but particularly this wave particle phenomena, the observer experiments and so on, the double slit experiment. And I wonder how much of that, you're talking about language, is really cutting at the foundations of our entire thought system, the dualistic this or that thinking of Western philosophy. But as you pointed to in that quote from Jung, just doesn't exist in the East, and as is shown in the Tao Te Ching, in the I Ching symbol.
Yeah, I mean, it's not there certainly in that. I mean, I think it does exist in the East, and I find an awful lot of Eastern spirituality horribly stuck in it. I think an awful lot of the Advaitic tradition is very stuck in an either-or approach, and really misses something so important. And is
you and me.
Ends up in such a dehumanized place. So yeah, I think it's everywhere. But it seems like, for me, it's like it becomes I begin to look for the opposites now. Whenever I'm, you can apply it to anything. Even you write down from, right now I'm experiencing an objective world and a subjective world. That's interesting, isn't it? Which is it was both of those. For instance, a situation, is it good or bad? Well, it's going to be both.
Yes.
And the important thing is to see, there will be something of both in it. And if you can get that, every situation is good. Not just good, but it is good. Because there's something good in it.
good, even if it's really, really bad.
Yeah, because of the opposites coexist inside each other. And once you see that, and the great thing about that is it allows someone like me who, I feel like I've been around, the longer I've lived, the more I've seen the suffering of life. I've seen how terrible it can be. I feel immense compassion in the face of it. I don't want to dismiss that. And yet there's this incredible optimism and love of life in me. But if I can step into these painful places and go, it's both. I can be there. I can be with, like I've been with my dying parents over the last few years, both of them. And I can step into that, and I don't feel I have to choose between and I can go, those two sit together in me.
Yeah.
I'm
That's so exquisitely put. And you've mentioned Advaita, and I think just giving you've touched on objective, subjective, giving another example of what these paradoxes are. Obviously, one of the most fundamental ones we encounter is that right now there is this presence, this awareness, this this emptiness that is here, this field of being, and there's this character, this me, that goes at times, but it fucking, excuse me language, always comes back, right? So this dichotomy is so easily grasped and experienced that we are both. We are the individuation, and we are the field in which it's all arising. And I could just imagine how unhelpful it would be if you're facing the death of your parents or any intimate situation, or indeed the suffering of the world, if we deny our humanness, if we deny our individuality, our families, our personalities.
You don't want to really look in the eyes of your lover while you're in bed going, you don't really exist, do you?
Sure. It's a bit of a passion killer, isn't it?
If you existed. It's like, okay. So, yeah, and what I see happens, I see it time and time again, is that people often, ironically, paradoxically, the very people who least think they're doing it are actually immersed in ideology. They're caught up in an ideology, which means they are ignoring the obvious, something which is so clearly in front of them, which is that there's two, the other, they're in one perspective and there's a refusal to see the other.
Yes.
And of course, the traditional one is, we're all caught up in separateness, which we, most of us are. And the thing we're refusing to see is the oneness, is to step out into the non-dual, is to see what you call that's indescribable presence. Which once you see it, it's like, wow, that's beautiful. The irony is that a huge number of people, and I think I may have been guilty of this myself, which is probably why I know it so well, is that when you come into it, there's a kind of like, aha! Now all of that is kind of not there. And of course it is there. And I suppose the irony for me, on my journey, is that having spent quite a long period going into that and going, oh my God, and wanting to share it with people. Now, with the opposite, I find myself coming right into the separateness and going, it's all about separateness. That's the important bit. Sure. The oneness, kind of obvious. The separateness is where the action is. That's where we need to. Once you've got this, that's where you need to put your attention. That's where we can have this conversation. That's where you can, make the journey. And unlike a lot of people who get into a non-dual philosophy of denial, I think the journey is really insignificant. I think it's really important, this journey we're on, with all of its opposites. So It's not a great journey which we should always be happy in, or Absolutely. We should always be this in. It's like a great journey in which we should be thrown between the paradoxical poles, because through that something happens to us.
And that seems to be an integral part of this whole time-space realm, doesn't it? The contrast that we get to experience, and the joy means nothing without the despair, and vice versa. The happiness and the sadness, they're clearly essential to each other.
It's kind of drama, isn't it? It's like, we love stories as human beings, and it's because they bounce between the opposites, and we're in one. And it's what, I'm hearing your story for the first time. With the brain tumor, it's like, whoa, it's like, that's a story. It's like, okay, right, okay, I'm in.
And
isn't it?
That brings to mind another beautiful paradox that certainly arose in, this thing of paradox, it only ever arises in the articulation, in the conceptualizing. So I was going to express that the experience of being diagnosed was this complete surrender to death, complete surrender to whatever was going to happen, and simultaneously a strong movement to doing whatever possible to allowing myself to live for as long as possible. And one without the other would be ridiculous for me. They were both so important. And the mind looks at that and says, wait a minute, am I surrendering or am I creating a self-induced healing? It
does that until it gets paralogical thinking, or whatever you want to call it. Sure. Once you get that, there's this huge relief. You go, oh, I see, I can do both of those at once.
Yes, indeed. And the two are contained in each other as well.
I can be divine and I can be a human, vulnerable human being at the same time. I can be in a space there. In fact, there is always a place in me where I'm just embracing what is. It's already happening.
Sure.
And there's a place where I'm human. And do you know what? Sometimes I don't. And do you know what? Sometimes it's because it's shit.
Yeah.
And it's like your thing, your radical gratitude, which I love. I can practice that radical gratitude here. Sure. Of just going, yeah. But if something awful, God forbid, happens to my daughter, I'm not going to be practicing radical gratitude. I'm going to be
Absolutely.
and those two sit together.
Absolutely.
Don't they? They
Absolutely.
really do. And that's a huge revelation, I think.
I agree entirely. And I recall a funny experience at a hotel in the Netherlands where I was giving a talk on radical gratitude. And in the lead up, I got some customer service at the reception desk that I didn't enjoy. And there was this moment of resistance to it. And so it's like, and I laughed, of course, because okay, so here am I teaching about radical gratitude. My ego wants to say, but it was only a minute or two or a second or two of resistance. But the two do coexist. And in my experience, there's the paradox that, embracing death, embracing the brain tumor, no difficulty at all. But the humanness of experiencing life and customer service and whatever else it might be is still very much there as well.
Yeah, and needs to be. It's like, it's great to find the place. I mean, really great to find the place where, as Seng Stan, the third Zen patriarch, says, there is no separation between yes and no or good or bad. The great way is easy for those that have no preferences, all of that stuff. Where you kind of go, oh yes, the great way is easy for those that I have no, and you think, yeah, that's the here.
Yeah.
But here I have preferences, and I want to have preferences. Sure. I choose to have preferences. It seems right to have preferences, and being able to tell good and bad apart, not just in terms of what's good and bad for Tim or what I love, but also morally.
Sure.
Seems real. I mean, it seems I want people to. I mean, I really wish that people would wake up to what's good and bad,
absolutely,
and act well, and not just go, oh well, they're the same and there's no difference. It's like, fuck that.
Yeah, we're in a world. I mean, I've certainly been. It's a fascinating point, because the realization, the insight that there is no good and bad, that they are just fabrications, they're constructs that we have created, is exquisite and to be sung from the rooftops. But as you say, or as you imply, if this is then taken out into the world as nothing matters, that there's no judgment to be made or discernment to be brought to the circumstance we find ourselves in, then that just takes out of the game those people in the spiritual scene who we would hope are on the forefront, are on the leading edge of creating a new world and actually making a world that is a little bit more functional and less messed up than it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And the biggest thing I see is that when we just retreat to the safety of the non-dual space, you've gone up to the top of the mountain, to use the Zen analogy, and you've lost the valley. You've lost the marketplace. You've lost that embodiment. And usually, nearly always, what's missing is love. Because, why, I'm a love junkie is because the love comes with the both. If you're just caught in the separateness, it's all very scary, isn't it? And you can, you end up, that's where the ego gets a bad name, because then it becomes egotistical. It's about me, and I'm scared. Sure. Once you wake up to this deeper thing, that's no longer like that. Then that part of you is just, it's a human being, is doing its best. And then the love comes through, because that's the connection, the connection I feel with you is I love Will. It's not just like,
I love Will's non-dual presence. It's something individuated here. There's something,
and I also can love God through you, or the oneness through you. But there's also a distinct thing about you, which I particularly enjoy.
Yeah, and this is divine in itself, is it not? The way that life has created these individuated characters who are all the same and yet entirely different and individuated. What a exquisite thing to celebrate and embrace.
It's stunning. And I'll tell you the other area where I think this, because we're dealing with a phenomena which I've witnessed grow in spirituality really radically over the last 10 or 20 years while I've been exploring things outwardly, writing and doing stuff with people. And it wasn't there before, not in the same way. It's become huge now. And there's all sorts of other things involved in it. One of which is death. Because an understanding of death is absolutely central to to spirituality, I think.
Yeah.
And and that's because it's absolutely essential to life. It's like,
It's
personally,
the
I've been
paradox.
obsessed by death all my life, because how can you live without engaging with death? And I've engaged with it a lot. Through
You've worked with dying people, and
and had a lot of people die around me, and you obviously have been on a personal journey which has gone, all of that. So I haven't had that, and
I haven't had the lots of people dying around me. It's a little bit. I say half in jest, of course. I'm a little jealous because it's such a profundity. It's such a thing of life. But other than my dear sweet Gypsy and Polly, my dog's dying when I was younger, I haven't had that depth of experience.
Well, let me reassure you, Will, that you will.
It will come.
And by the time you reach my age, you will a lot.
I'll have an abundance of this experience.
Yeah,
so
and then you'll be able to look back and go, wow, that's great. I've looked at all those dead people. And eventually, if you live long enough, by looking at my parents, more people are dead than alive. Yeah. And then you become dead yourself. But obviously the key thing in there is, okay, so if your emphasis is on the oneness, is on the non-dual, and if the enemy is a separateness, what is death? Because it becomes very similar to really the sort of reductionism you see in scientific materialism, which is the opposite reductionism to it's all just object, it's all just matter, there's nothing's there, and this is just thrown up for a while and goes, oh, hello, Will, and then it's gone.
Sure.
And if personally, that not only doesn't, it's a very dark vision of what real life is, and doesn't fit with my experience. My experience is that life is not like that. Life is magical and full of meaning, and it's banal too, of course, but it also is magical and full of meaning, and death particularly. So we need an understanding of what's important, which incorporates some understanding of death, and that involves understanding what it is in us which is not mortal.
Indeed. And so here we have perhaps one, I was going to say the ultimate paradox. There's many we've already touched, which we could say are the ultimate paradoxes, but that which is not mortal, that which is eternal and infinite, that which we can experience and know, not in these words eternal and infinite sound really exotic, but in the experience it's just like, oh right, yeah, this doesn't have a beginning, this doesn't have an end, this doesn't exist in time. So we don't die, we could say. This is seen to be true, and yet that's a very nice clarity to arise when you've been diagnosed with a brain tumor and in general, but of course Will Pye does die. And the desire to keep Will Pye alive for myself and for my family, for my mum and dad, it would be terribly rude of me to die before they do. So at this point, this non-dual insight, this impersonal realization is useless,
Yes, and there's a middle place, isn't there, in this paradox, where there's the Will and Tim, and then there's the oneness. And then is there something between these two? What is the nature? How complex are we? How much? What is this separate identity? And is the other theme which you get throughout most of the spiritual traditions I've written on, and I must have written on all of them, is that it's not just God and the body. So
we're talking about the soul now, or some sort of individuated aspect of the Godhead, or?
Yes, I think we are. And soul would be the traditional name. And what's interesting about the word soul is that soul is referring, the ancient Greek word that's used in the West is psyche. And I think what they're talking about is psyche. And then if I look at this moment, one of the paradoxes we started off with is I'm experiencing two types of reality right now. One is the sensual world, and one is psyche or soul. And I'm experiencing them right now. And one is... there's a body. I'm a body in it, and the body seems to be very much part of it and relies on it. And then there's this other thing, psyche or soul, which is not in this. I don't know. It's not in this at all. I can't. It's
not here. Yeah.
It transcends this. Now, that I think is what we need to be exploring when we start looking at the psyche and soul and the ideas of what death may or may not be, is the relationship between that thing, which is what we really feel we are, psyche or soul, the thing which is really will, which is, if we, one of those ancient great sort of film thought experiments is, what would happen if your psyche or soul was suddenly in my body and you were looking out through these eyes and I was looking out through yours? If that were to happen, and I don't think it can, but if it were to, if we can imagine it, I would be going, oh God, I'm Tim looking out of Will's eyes or Will's body. I wouldn't be going the other way around. I'd go with the psyche or the soul. That's what I see. That's what I feel myself to be.
Sure.
Which is, so that's very interesting, I think, and shows us something about our identity, which we need to, which is very central to spirituality, and which again points to the importance of the individuating separateness as well as the deep divinity and oneness.
I recall something that was quite distinct. It was notable as well because I haven't sort of read of it elsewhere or heard other people speak in the same way. But for me, post non-dual realization, so after the sort of, I am the table and the table is me and there's no one here, and all neurosis fell away and will fell away, and it was like, great, I'm done. I'm just going to be happily, joyfully enlightened for the next 60 years. After that,
after I'd arrived,
there was
the journey after arrival.
Funnily enough, I'm sure I'd read 100 times to not imagine that something had been stabilized or a stage had been reached, but nonetheless, that was, of course, what was thought. What was amazing, what was beautiful, what was exquisite, and I was truly in awe and marvel of was the arising of me again, and its convincingness. I was like, the enlightenment experience, if we can call it that, is kind of like, oh right, yeah, it's not so much, right? It's back to chopping wood and carrying water. But in my experience, the experience of me arising and the convincingness of it within the context of the vastness was astonishing. It was like, how does this happen? How does it work? It was just exquisite to experience.
I know exactly what you mean. And then the place you kind of end up, or I think the circle, which the paradox for me was, I see, God has recognized God, but through Tim, or the void has found the void, but through this individual experiencing form. Which is, that's, okay. So the journey of wisdom, the journey of life, actually takes on then a brand new meaning, and rather than being something dismissed or ending, actually starts in earnest, I think.
Absolutely. And I just got an emotional feeling because, of course, the difference in the philosophy or the ideology, as you say, that's what it becomes. The realization always becomes an ideology or a thought system. The difference between emphasizing nothingness, the difference between emphasizing that there's no one here, and the realization of that, and then being allowed to recognize that this me character, this will that has hurt so much, that has suffered so much, that has endured all the trials some of the trials and tribulations of separation, could now know itself as an instrument of God, as an instrument of the divine. I'm loved that much that God would play with itself through me, if you like. And
an unfortunate phrase, but I'm with you.
if God, I'm sure God masturbates.
I'm sure God does do that too. Of course, and why wouldn't he?
Absolutely. Well, maybe he got bored of that and then created the world. Who could say?
But isn't that lovely? I think that's and the real. I suppose the assumption for me, and I'm talking decades ago now, when I was had some sort of enlightenment fantasy going, which I just imported. I'm like most of my generations in spirituality. I just imported Eastern religion.
Sure.
And regarded it as true.
That's not still happening.
Because it wasn't Western.
Sure.
But turned out it wasn't. And so when I still had those Enlightenment fantasies, I think what I thought would happen was that, when I do discover this thing, which I would touch and touch and touch, but when I really get it, Tim would somehow become perfect in some way, or I don't know.
Yeah.
And then what's actually happened is much more interesting, which is Tim hasn't. What's the polarity, the paradox is between this deep, transcendent thing, and which is my being, or is being, not mine particularly, but being, and then Tim, who actually feels safe enough then to be a kind of vulnerable human being on a journey which is a bit scary but intriguing, and who screws up sometimes but does his best, and loves being with other people who are exploring the same thing, and it's kind of there's such a poignancy to that.
Yeah,
it's a lovely. There's a humility to that. That's what it is. There's a real, not a fake, silly humility, but a genuine, honest to goodness recognition.
Yeah.
Of the opposites. Oh, I'm both of these. How interesting.
And something came to mind as you were speaking that it's significant that in that process of enlightening or awakening, that it doesn't erase, it doesn't put the personality back to point zero, it doesn't remove all the neuroses, it doesn't actually make this perfect human being. And what does that say? Well, that says that the God that we experience, the divinity that we touch, the enlightened presence, this pure awareness, seems to be quite comfortable with our humanity, seems to be quite okay with our neuroses and ongoing imperfections, idiosyncrasies, and so on. And again, this is about that love, right? If we can touch this more deeply and receive this, that every single screwed up part of me is okay. Every single part of me is loved and welcome here.
One of the great paradoxes which I'm working a lot with at the moment, Will, is the moment seems to me the place where all the paradoxes coexist, and there's many of them. We've been talking about one and separate, and one and many, and that's one of them. But another one which you've just touched on there a bit, really, which is for me the terms that really work for me is the past and the possible. That this moment is the meeting of everything that has been and everything that could be, and it's right where those two meet, and the whole of the past is implicitly in the moment. There's a kind of another fad which has gone through of obsession with the moment, with the now. It's all just now. Well, bollocks.
Sure.
Of course it's not. None of these words would make any sense if it was all just now.
The history of the language and so on. Sure.
You'd never get to the end of a sentence. You just hear funny, there'd be it's nonsense. Obviously, everything is arising from the past. That's why it makes sense. There's a foundation and a solidity to it. How wonderful. And recently I've been feeling more and more this moment can only be this moment because of everything that's gone before is in it. Everything I've ever experienced is meeting everything you've ever experienced. It's all there. And what soul contains is everything.
Yeah.
And then we meet. And so all of that neuroses, all of that past is not going to ever go. There's everything that's we've ever experienced is what we are. And that's great.
Until it does go, because it does or does not, or softens or is polished.
It changes, and it becomes, and it's not there. It's not dominating you. It's not causing you problems. It's way back. There's things I experienced when I was very little, which I don't remember them even, but they've all informed who I am.
Yeah, the nervous system, the brain has remembered these experiences. Whatever work we do, there are parts of our experience at that early age that is imprinted on our.
See, I'm saying something else to that. What I'm trying to say, and this is kind of jumping, this is a big conversation, which we've been talking for too long already. So this is what happened to us in the coffee shop when we first talked, isn't it?
I'm keeping an eye on the time. It's good.
Good man. Because what I want to suggest here is something more. It's about the nature of soul, and it's a big conversation. But that one of the things I got from my study of the Gnostics was this idea of soul as a flow of experience. And not as a thing, but as a process, a flow of experience. And so there's the dream of life, which is all soul. And then there's all these individual fragments of it. There's the dream of being Tim, the dream of being Will. And so this flow of experience right now, everything about it is all soul. It's all the one flow of experience. So, and what I'm exploring at the moment is that it contains all of the past, not the body. The memory. It's a bit like Rupert Sheldrake's thing. That what the brain is doing is like a interface or a radio or something. It's
Sure.
interfacing with that, but it's
Sure.
interfacing with the past, not with memory, but actually with the past, which exists. Everything which has come into form is in form now.
And it exists now, of course. So this is the power of now. This past exists now. It's real now. So in this nonlinear time, we can see the future and the past, all that has ever happened, and it's happening now.
No, no, I don't think that's right. I think there's a real problem with this idea of linear time. And I think it's a metaphor which has got out of hand, and we've misunderstood the nature of time. We've picked up, particularly in the 19th century, we picked up this idea that time was like train tracks. It came from, I think, probably from determinism. There's the past, there's now, there's the future, and let's go. And if we could stand back far enough, we'd just see the whole thing, because it's all deterministic. It's all, and that's horrible, because that means this conversation has already happened, and there's no point us even bothering. It's like it's another destruction of life.
Is that necessarily true? Is it not possible that free will and the spontaneity and novelty can exist within the determinism? I mean, is that not a paradox in itself?
I mean, I think there's a deterministic element of life, but if there's free will within it, then the future is not determined. It may be partially determined, it may be predictable, but it's not determined. So it's not changed.
For me, that's one of the juicy. I want you to come back to that. I know there's a stream of thought that I really want to hear the flow of. But
okay, so the follow-up is, rather than, that's why I've stopped using the word the future, because because people get into this thing that the future is already there. Whereas the thing about the future is it isn't already there. The past has taken form. The formless has arisen as all of these experiences, which is the past. That's formed. The future is possible. Now, it's predictable. We can see certain ways that it can go, but the very nature of it is that it is the formless. This moment, the past and the possible are the formed and the formless. They're meeting now. We're experiencing them both. And that rather than time passing, the metaphor that I feel we should explore is that time accumulates. So what's happening, it seems when I look at my actual experience, it doesn't feel like it's passing. It feels like what's happening is I'm accumulating more and more past.
Sure.
I've got more past now than when we first started this conversation.
Yeah.
I haven't made a journey like on a train track through something which is already there. It's just the past is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And as it does, I am more formed. I'm more formed. I'm more formed than I was when I started by talking with you, as it moves into the possible.
And this distinction that you make is profound in the sense that, of course, if we imagine both personally and collectively, if we're imagining that the future is set, so the planet is going to destroy in the next 100 years as a result of human behavior, for example, or indeed, in my personal experience, if I would have believed that it's my destiny to be dead by 40 as a result of a brain tumor, for example. So this is the application of such a thought system. And yet, if we're open to this possibility, if we're open to the future as unformed, as you're pointing to there, then that's a absolutely entirely different story to live from.
Yes,
and essential if Will Pye is maybe going to live beyond 40, and also if the planet here is going to be habitable. Habitable is not a word. If it's going to be livable, that's the one. Thank you for our children and their grandchildren and so on. Yeah,
because. And this does relate back to where this whole conversation started, because I think these are different words they're pointing always towards the same great polarities, the same paradox. So the more conscious one becomes of the formless, the more you see the possible. So because it has no form. And so that the more awake you are, the more you are not deterministic. You don't just do the same thing again. You are creative. You can see new possibilities. The universe through Tim or through Will goes, what about this?
Yeah.
And it's doing it now in this conversation. What about saying that next?
Sure.
And because of this.
And then
if that wasn't there, we'd just be, robots.
Sure. And in this context, it's like free will is an emergent property that develops when we become more aware. When we actually see our patterns, we then have the opportunity to choose. And up until that point, we are like robots. If we're just up in that conditioned self-experience, then there's not much novelty or bifurcation points and so on. But with this knowing and with this responsibility, I mean, both in that, the meaning that we'd be familiar with of responsibility, but also that ability to respond, that makes this moment so sacred and so exciting and so loaded with possibility. Like, what next? You know, what are we going to create together as human beings?
Oh God, yeah, absolutely will. Because then what you said then was beautiful. I mean, yeah, free will or consciousness or the ability to choose, which is on a deeper level, the whole, you know, the oneness, God choosing through you or God choosing through me, that ability becomes central. So rather than this again, world denying denial of your very humanity, like, oh, there is no choice, there is no free will. It's like,
There is no will.
You know that thing in you that's, you know, in a human being that goes, that's the most important thing about me. That's not an egotistical mistake that's binding you to ignorance. That's wisdom.
Sure.
That's why kids have it. They know that's the thing. When you bring up a child, you want to increase in them. So they learn how to become more and more aware of the possible, to think, to imagine, to not be caught in just repeating the past, which of course is their whole program as a child, to come into the. So I think that's exactly right. It's emergent in each one. It's emerged collectively. It's emerged individually through coming into the world. And the wisdom path of growing in more consciousness seems exactly about having more choice and then the will to implement that choice, which, as we all know, is not easy.
Indeed. And this individuated experience is, of course, the means by which this presence knows itself, the means by which waking up happens at all. I heard this wonderful phrase from Tibetan Buddhism the other day called, you may have heard it, Vajra pride. So this is not the small pride of, oh, I am great, I got good marks at school, but it's the pride of recognizing the truth of our being, the truth of who we actually are, the Christ consciousness, the Buddha nature, and to have a pride in this, but not a small pride. I like this phrase, a Vajra pride.
Very nice. Yeah, that's right.
So here we are, the impersonal many, the individuated ones as well. There's one point, I think we're reaching a nice natural point to wrap up, but there's one point that you pointed us to, and I just want to maybe wrap up with you on, because I know it's something you're passionate about as a love junkie, and I'm the same way inclined. That this gelling agent, that which keeps the universe together, I think Bishardam put it, this synthesizing agent, love, so important. I mean, it's like, of course, but what we've been pointing to is an antidote to the denial of love to parts of our experience, that non-dual philosophy, that the denial of the personhood, the denial of me, can so attractively allow us to avoid. And there's quite enough denial, disassociation, self-loathing, subconscious guilt, and shame on this planet without supposedly people on the cutting edge of culture and spiritual inquiry adding to it. So I just really want to honor that particular element of the paralogical thinking. I know I've heard you articulate many times, and that yes, we are this non-dual reality, and yes, we are me, and me is loved, me is looked after, me is cared for, me is valued, and an integral part of this enlightening process, this awakening journey.
It's so important, Will. What you're saying is so important, because what I see, and sometimes, I mean, usually it's fine, but honestly, sometimes it really breaks my heart, because I see really well-meaning, great people saying one of the poles with such passion and ferocity, and the pole I'm thinking of here is the one which is the non-dual pole. And what I see happening is the other in the person who's listening, I can see the attraction of it because it's beautiful. But because they haven't also grounded it in the other, there's a wilting. There's a kind of there's people don't see the implicit ways that spirituality has, because of its past, grown into a life-denying thing. So much of it is denying of the very process that we've come into, of having kids, of growing in the world, of learning wisdom, of making mistakes, of being vulnerable, of being human. It is in the attraction of the safety and the transcendent can turn into something which hurts that by, like you said, adding to the weight of this self-loathing which is already there, rather than what it can be, which is to find that great love, that oneness, and bring it back and embrace it and help it grow and make the journey. And so that you feel empowered by that to be this separate expression of the deep oneness, rather than constantly it's the little snidey remarks about it that really upset me. You just go, oh, don't say that, don't be like that. Or about the mind, the mind, it's like the mind becomes this awful thing, and you just think it's not an awful thing, it's a wonderful thing.
The sort of new version of the devil. We need to have that bogeyman, and it's the mind, or it's the ego, or it's the self. And yet these are the very mechanisms by which we realize this transcendent witness, the very mechanism by which we experience the divinity within us.
So I've got this, I felt like I don't think I've mentioned this in public, as it were, because I'm aware that we are having this conversation, the two of us, but I'm also aware of feeling the future presences of all the people that I hope will enjoy being the third person in our conversation.
Sure.
Alas, we can't hear them, but they're there. And so I haven't mentioned this word, but I, as you know, invent words because I get so frustrated that I can't find a word to express what I needed to express. And some words work and some don't. So this is a new one, which I'm not sure it's going to work yet, but it's working at the moment.
Sure.
Which is, we've talked a lot about individuating, which is, a great word, and Carl Jung used it a great deal. And
as part of the build-up, I just want to emphasize this is exclusive, ladies and gentlemen, to Awakening Dialogues. So for now.
Well, I feel that what I want to talk about is, and the phrase I'm using at the moment is unividuating. Because what I need is a paralogical concept, which goes, because individuating sounds like it's just about becoming more and more individual, more separate. But the great paradox is, the more individual we become, the more we wake up to our own uniqueness, the more we think for ourselves, discover things for ourselves, experience for ourselves our deep nature, all of that, which makes us more and more particular.
Sure.
Through that, we become more conscious.
Yeah.
Anyone who's listening to this will have been through that process. The vast majority of human beings will not be listening to this, but those who've doubted, who've thought, who've questioned, who felt moved, they may listen to this. They've become more themselves, more individual. But through that, we become more conscious. And as you become more conscious, you can wake up to being conscious of the oneness.
And then express that oneness, of course, through the personhood. We all express.
So we need a paralogical concept which goes, look, waking up is becoming more and more of yourself, so you realize that something that transcends the self. And it's about knowing yourself so you can show yourself. It's about self-transcendence, because then you can express yourself. That there's all of these. We need a concept, and unividuation is mine at the moment, to say what we can do in life is all of those opposites, and we need to do always both. It's like left without right or in without out. They exist together, and deep inside, I feel we know that. Sure. We know that it's both of those. And the thing which you brought us back to, which is the place I would definitely like us to hold as we finish our conversation, is that that's what love is. Love is, love isn't just waking up to the oneness. It's the bodhisattva thing. It's, there's this oneness, this love, and now I must express it. Now I must go into the suffering with it. And I must give myself away to it.
Both our own. I mean, this is it, right? The personal, my suffering, Will Pye's particular pains and flavors of separation and wounds and whatever's that are held in the body, and of course in the world, the suffering that's out there in the world.
Exactly.
So much suffering in the world.
It's huge. It's huge,
humbling and overwhelming. And yet in this awakening, in this love, we have something that is of value to bring to the circumstance. So I love this concept. I love the word as well. It actually works for me. Unividuation. It sounds like a word. Have you checked it's not a word already in some esoteric system from far away?
Not that I found yet.
It's beautiful. I really love that, and I think that's a lovely point to sort of reach completion on this idea of unividuation, the individual journey, the awakening journey as one, and this manifesting love, this allowing love to be felt and received and coming into form, wherever that might be.
Mm.
Tim,
Hallelujah.
been a joy as always. I'm looking forward to getting down to Glastonbury when I'm here again in August. I love you. I love your company. I love your gifts to the world, and I'm really happy that we got to hear a little new one there with unividuation. And just for everyone watching, this will be on the website as well, but Paralogical Thinking is featured in The Mystery Experience, which is one of my favorite books of the last 10 years. It's an exceptional you've had a bit of practice, haven't you? I think you wrote 30 odd before that one, and I highly recommend that to anyone watching. Any closing thoughts or sharings from yourself, Tim?
It's been such a joy, as always, and I think it's a lovely experiment that you're doing. It's so nice to engage all these years having these wonderful conversations and thinking, wouldn't it be great to share these? And you're doing that, and that's wonderful. And I hope everyone who's listening to it has felt part of the conversation and felt that love, which is what it's all about. At the end of the day, it's like, I love it, don't you? Let's end with that paradox. It's really complex, and we can think about it in all these ways, and it's really, really simple as well. And at the end of the day, there's silence and there's love.
Let's love our way into the silence. Tim, thank you for joining us today. It's been a joy.
It's a pleasure.